Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Korman Productions, here to talk about This Is Us, Season 5, Episode 14, The Music in the Mirror. Before going any further, I will tell you two things. One, this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't yet watched the episode, I highly recommend that you go and watch that episode before coming in and watching my video. Second of all, if you like this video and want to support the channel, please subscribe to my channel. This is going to be a shorter video than normal. I'm not going to be doing my usual scene-by-scene analysis. I just worked a very long week, and thus I am pretty exhausted, so I'm doing a quicker hit than normal. I might at some point decide to do a longer video on this episode, but not at this time. And I gotta say that I was proven wrong with this episode. I speculated in a video that I thought Phylicia Rashad's character, Beth's mom, was about to die because of an ominous line in the promo for this episode, with Deja saying that Beth does not need a hero, she just needs someone to be there for her. And I'm glad I'm wrong because I like Phylicia Rashad's character now. I wasn't a fan of her in the past, but now I am. To be fair to myself, I also speculated that it was also possible that this would have something to do with her music studio, or her dance studio rather, and that is what it turned out to be. That said, the one beef I do have with this episode is that Phylicia Rashad's character is nowhere to be seen. She's now living with Randall and Beth and the kids. So where has she been the past couple of episodes? Here it's not quite so glaring. In the previous episode, Brotherly Love, it was definitely noticeable. I mean, at this point, you kind of have to account for where she is. And they could have done that with a single line, basically saying she's visiting family or something. Or she could have been with the Beth and the girls, going on their ice skating escapade. Perhaps Phylicia Rashad was not available for that episode, so she didn't end up appearing that way, but one line reference to where she is would have been all that you would have needed to take care of that. This episode is in the category of one of those scattershot episodes where there's way too much going on, way too much story, that none of them really have a chance to breathe. And this is obviously done because there's only 3 episodes left, including this one. Typically, there would have been 18 episodes in the season. They're only getting 16 this time around, which of course is due to all the production problems throughout the season that delayed the season in the first place. But because they have less episodes to play with, they kind of have to rush people into the spots that they want them to be. Now, having said that, there's a ton of good material here still that make up for the scattershot nature of the episode. For instance, the opening of this episode is quietly devastating. Watching as Beth's dance studio slowly fails and eventually goes under and has to close because of the whole coronavirus thing. Now, there are a lot of people who would rather have not included Corona in This Is Us storylines. You can make an argument going both directions, and I would probably respect where you're coming from. I, for one, am not bothered by the inclusion. I think it's worked to great effect in some instances. They mostly stayed surface level, with exceptions. For instance, in The Room. I mean, that entire episode was an ode to everything that's been going on, with basically having to celebrate all the milestones that were going on via video screen because they couldn't physically be present due to Corona. And not to mention Michael O'Neill's character in that episode, whose wife was dying and he couldn't be there because his wife was worried about getting him sick. The opening scene of this episode is probably the most effective use to date of this, of including the coronavirus in the storyline. Just watching the slow closure of Beth's dance studio, her dream. It's absolutely devastating, and it reflects things that are actually happening in the real world. People's businesses, specifically the small businesses, are closing down and never going to reopen again because of the coronavirus, or because of the over-the-top nature of some of the restrictions. And yes, that is a debatable point, but I do feel that some of the nature of the restrictions have been heavy-handed. And the economic impact cannot be understated. And the opening scene effectively shows that end of things. Susan Kelechi Watson has been quietly the MVP of this season. She's been absolutely phenomenal this season. Now, not to say she hasn't been great before, but she's gotten more interesting material, I would say. Throughout this episode, we get hints that she's not handling the whole closure of her dreams very well. She's starting to crack up a little bit, which is the most evident after she gets canceled on for an interview she didn't even want in the first place. The other actress in this episode who plays Beth as the teen version, Rachel Hilson, is also really good in this episode. She's always been pretty great too, and she has a nice little career going for herself, but she is especially a standout during the course of this one. Randall was barely in this episode, basically bookending Beth's story. He was there at the beginning when he told Deja to look after her, and at the end when, instead of speechifying or trying to find a solution to the problem, he simply does what he did in the past to comfort her. He turned on some music, the same song as we see in the early teen timeline, and he asked her to dance. And it's really quite touching and kind of a refreshing thing for Randall to do, as opposed to the usual speech making and trying to comfort her through words, which is his usual way of going about things. Moving on to Kevin and Madison's storyline. Madison is apparently going to go dress shopping and hanging with Kate and Kate's mother. Now, she's known Kate's mother forever, but not Kevin's mother, which happens to be the same thing, but, that makes sense in Madison's neurotic little mind. Both Kevin's and Madison's threads, which really diverge from each other, seem kind of like their responses to criticisms that, unlike a lot of what I hear about Randall, I have some sympathy for. Not completely, but I have some sympathy and even kind of agree to a certain extent. A lot of fans this season have been talking about how Madison has been way more self-assured, not the neurotic character that we've seen throughout the seasons. And part of me feels like they do have a point, but part of me feels like this is because we are seeing more of Madison. Now, even neurotic people are not neurotic all the time. They have their self-assured moments. They have their different facets. People are multidimensional. I have confidence problems. I'm neurotic. But I don't have those issues all the time. There's times where my confidence is higher than usual. There's times where I'm more self-assured. So we're seeing more of Madison. So we're seeing some of this more self-assuredness side of her character, which could still be there despite also being heavily neurotic. And there was at least one episode where Madison was faking it. She was pretending to be self-assured, and we later learned that not so much. But if you feel like Madison hasn't really been Madison this season, I feel you. I understand where you're coming from. I don't fully agree, but I sympathize with your argument. In this early scene, we see that Kevin is trying to help Madison using old theater games to help her, which was cute. And we were introduced to the idea that Madison's father, who she hasn't spoken to in quite some time, and is only now reaching out because he saw her in a magazine, might actually attend their wedding. Which, of course, turns out to be not the case when he calls to tell her that he will not, in fact, be there when she is with Kate and Rebecca. Rebecca and her end up sharing a touching scene where Rebecca tries to calm her down, make her feel better, both about the fact that her father won't be there, that she is in fact family, and that if she had any doubts about Madison being good for Kevin, that she would not let her marry her son. Meanwhile, Kevin is going to meet up with his former director, Foster, to screen the movie. And they watch the movie together, and the director thanks Kevin for putting on an amazing performance. And some background, of course. Kevin walked out in the movie to go and be there for Madison during the birth of his children, walking out in the movie, and this is the first time they've seen each other since, though that doesn't make any sense because apparently there was some reshoots with Robert De Niro, and I'm assuming that the director would have been in on that, though maybe not. Maybe the second-hand director was involved in that, and Foster Kane not so much. And Kevin says the movie is amazing, but then he walks outside and is like, yeah, this movie's a piece of crap. He calls his agent, and apparently word is getting around town that the movie is a stinker. So Kevin calls an emergency session with his agent to basically mitigate the damage, get him apart now before this movie has a chance to come out and ruin his career. Now, there was at least one person who speculated that Foster did this on purpose, made a bad movie just to make Kevin look bad in response to Kevin walking out on him. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think the director would do that because releasing a stinker of a movie would hurt his career just as much as it hurts Kevin. And I don't really see an artistic type doing that to themselves. In the emergency meeting, Kevin is having trouble with his agent and whoever these other people are finding a good project. And that's because Kevin already has a reputation for walking out on projects. He walked out on The Manny. He walked out on The Play way back when, which of course we know was to help Randall when he was breaking down. But still, without that context, it doesn't look good. And by the way, that episode, Jack Pearson's son, is next on the rewatch list, so we will be taking a look at that episode after the season ends. And then, of course, there was the walkout on the movie, which was to go and be with Madison, who was early on her pregnancy. You add all those things up, and you get quite a bit of a reputation. Now, this is where some of the criticisms of the audience come into play. Some people have been saying that Kevin should experience some repercussions for having done that. They wanted to see that. I wasn't necessarily in that camp, but I am sympathetic once again to that particular argument. So here it is. You got what you wanted. There is consequences for walking out on that movie. As Kevin is leaving that meeting, he happens to see Zoe on a Zoom call. She's in the room waiting for somebody to get back to her by herself on the phone. And Kevin spots her and then can't resist saying hi to her. Zoe, of course, being Kevin's girlfriend in season 3. Zoe makes a comment saying that Kevin has a way of making whatever happens seem like that's what he wanted all along. And she makes an example of saying, hey, you wanted Chinese food all this time. I mentioned the fact that I want sushi, and you make it seem like that's what you actually wanted the entire time. She thinks this is a charming quality about him. And some people thought this was, I don't know, for some reason people didn't like this comment from Zoe. I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think it was meant to be insulting. I take it at face value. She was saying that this is something that she actually liked about Kevin's character. Nevertheless, it shakes Kevin's character's confidence a little bit in what he's doing with his life, with Madison and the kids. Maybe he just convinced himself that's what he wanted all along, when perhaps that's not really what he wants. Further heightened when they are alone together later that night. Kevin wants to watch one show, Madison wants to watch another, and Kevin gives in. Though, to me, that's just standard couple stuff. That's not a bad thing, in my mind. Relationships are about compromise. Though, given what Zoe had said to him, and his crisis of confidence, which is slowly brewing under the surface, that kind of just adds to that sudden lack of confidence in himself and what he's doing. This is clearly going to lead into the plot of next week's episode with the return of Sophie, which we saw in the promo, which seems to just suggest that he's a little confused when he has a conversation with Sophie, not being clear on how do you know who you should marry. Now, I think this trailer is highly misleading, as they've been all season long. But nevertheless, this episode is going to give me hives, because the last thing I want to see at this point, after the entire season, is watching Kevin ditch Madison to go back out with Sophie. I guess Kevin doesn't really need to be with Madison if he doesn't really want to be, if that's not what he wants. But he absolutely needs to be there for the kids. And I'm convinced that this is what Kevin wants at this point, despite his crisis of confidence that he's clearly going to go through. And, when there's someone that you've cared for before in your life, like loved in your lifetime, especially someone who you have significant history with, as Kevin does Sophie, I don't feel like you ever completely lose love for that person. I think you always have some kind of feelings. So I think what Kevin is about to go through in the next episode is perfectly normal, and would be something that he would have on his mind just before getting married. Now, I thought the last time that we saw Sophie was good enough closure for the character, but perhaps this will provide actual closure. And I would say it's possible to love somebody and not be able to be with them. Not to be a good fit in a relationship. And I think that might actually be the case with Sophie. They had their time. The love will always be there. But they can't and shouldn't be together. Many people feel differently. Many people would disagree with me on that, but this is my video, so. But hey, if you have something to say on the matter, by all means, say something in the comments about it, and we can talk about it. Now, as far as Kate's character is concerned in this episode, we see her in the past, played by Hannah Zeal. We haven't really seen much of her this season. We haven't seen the teenage, college-aged kids much this season at all, with the few exceptions. Logan Schroyer, who plays the younger Kevin, is not in this episode at all. Kate ends up getting a job at the diner where she had her last special moment with Jack. And this diner is somewhere that she spends quite a few years working at. But she's essentially giving up on herself. She's telling her mother to just accept the fact that she's going to be a loser. That's not exactly what she said, but that's pretty much what's implied. Hey, get your wins as a parent from Randall. He's going to do you proud. Hell, you might even be able to get some wins from Kevin, who might be as successful himself as an actor. Who knows? But for me, don't bother. Rebecca tries to push back on that a little bit. Not hard enough, in my opinion. This ends up paying off with Kate taking the older Rebecca to see her new class. And basically sharing her newfound little bit of success that she's having with teaching these kids how to sing and play instruments and be musical, which is the perfect job for Kate. And Kate wanted to share that with her mother. And she's sorry that she gave her a win so late in the game, 40 years as a matter of fact. This has been a pretty good season for Kate. I've had my criticisms of the storylines that she's been given and of her not so quite great moments. In fact, sometimes I refuse to talk about some of her storylines, particularly in season 1. But outside a few moments, Kate has had a very good season. And this is another example of that. And this is more of the repair work that Kate and Rebecca have done on their relationship. The other half of the equation, Toby, he's not doing anywhere near as well. He's been laid off, and he's struggling with that. Struggling with being a full-time dad instead of doing a job that he loved doing. He's at home. He's been left with a leak in the roof that he is trying to fix himself, and that is not going very well. We see Timothy Osmond's character, who plays Gregory, Kate's friend, and we haven't seen him since the premiere. And I don't think we've ever had a scene between Toby and Gregory so far in the series. I think this is the first time. And there's a lot of, in the back half of the season, there's been scenes with people that we don't typically get to see together. And that's pretty great. I love that. And I love this. But the repair job is not going well. He's not managing to do himself. People keep insisting that he call the plumber. But Toby says that he can't afford that. Is that really the issue here? Is it really about not being able to afford a plumber? Or is this kind of a macho thing of, I'm a man, I can do this? Or is it simply because Toby is trying to be useful, trying to be the man of the house again, which kind of ties back into being the whole macho thing. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what this is all about. Toby gets desperate enough to call in his father, played by Dan Lauria, who we've only seen about 3 times during the course of the series. If you recognize him, you should, because he was Kevin's father in The Wonder Years, which is a show that aired way back when. He made an appearance on Smallville, which is the last time I can recall seeing him, other than on this series. And he has 202 credits to his name. His father comes over and ends up fixing the leak. And he has this rather curious sentiment where he says, you look for a problem when there's a leak, but not when there's pressure elsewhere. And he's talking about Toby. And this is a very curious sentiment because in the past, Tobys Dad was not exactly sympathetic to either his mom's or Toby's mental health issues. But I am rather curious where we're going with this. What are we implying here? Are we saying that Toby has a mental health issue that we're not seeing, because there's no leak yet, but the pressure's there? Are we talking about Kate and Toby's marriage? We know that Toby has feelings about him being a stay-at-home dad, about wanting to go back to work, that he has not yet expressed to Kate. He's not being honest about that. And as we know, communication is key in a relationship. And he's not doing that. He's lying. He's being full of crap. And this is going to come out at some point and cause problems. We know that. Probably at the end of the season. But what is Tobys Dad actually suggesting here? Is he suggesting that maybe he should be looking into his mental health? Which would be a curious sentiment once again, because he was not sympathetic about that in the past. Is he talking about Kate and Toby's marriage? Is he talking about something else? If you have an opinion about that, I would appreciate hearing from you in the comments. Anyway, that's all I got for you for this episode. It was a pretty good episode, scattershot as usual. I typically don't like when they do that, when they cram too much in and don't give storylines the attention that they deserve. Like, I think that Beth's story could have used more time. I thought that was worthy of more of an episode than we got here. Nevertheless, what we got there was pretty good. But I hope we aren't laying the groundwork for Beth having a meltdown. I hope this is the extent of it, because we've already had Randall have meltdowns. We don't need to give Beth the same character tracks, the same storylines that we give to Randall. So while her feelings aren't going to be completely resolved, she's going to struggle with that. I hope we aren't going to have any more further, hints at a meltdown. As for Kevin, we're going to see where his story goes. His story is going to be pretty big in the final couple of weeks. We're going to have him reunite with Sophie, and apparently his wedding is going to be in the finale. That's what the Internet Movie Database is suggesting, that they're all going to meet up for their wedding. So Madison and Kevin's relationship isn't going to end in the next episode, but who knows about the finale? Maybe he gets cold feet and doesn't go through with it. I certainly hope that's not the direction we go, but we'll see. And clearly something bad is in store for Toby and Kate's relationship, but that has always seemed like the case to me. So we'll see where that goes. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Korman Productions. You can join my 2 Facebook groups, the Korman Productions one, as well as the This Is Us discussion page. You can buy me a copy, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. You can buy something from the Zazzle store, the Korman Productions store on Zazzle, rather. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Korman Productions, signing off.